Welcome back. All right. So I want to talk about a player from each team who I feel like has had a noteworthy, newsworthy season. And so on the board, we've got each division. We've got Pacific, and then Central, and then Atlantic, and then Metro. And I put the logos up in a random order because that's fine. But at any rate, yeah, I want to talk about one player from each team. Not worried about the numbers in terms of their points and their goals or anything. And not favorite players either. Favorite players I feel like deserves to be an end of the season during the playoffs kind of video. So, starting things off at the top of the board, Tomas Hertl. When Hertl went to Vegas from San Jose, I really did not expect Hertl to be as productive in Vegas as he'd been in San Jose because I felt like, well, he's going to get less ice time, probably get less goals. And really, that hasn't been the case. He has excelled with the Vegas Golden Knights. He's been fantastic. And as long as he's healthy and good to go for the first round of the playoffs, I think we could be talking about a strong playoff run for Vegas, which could revolve around not just Hertl, but he could be one of those top guys for them. Really prominent role and in a situation where I didn't expect it. Vancouver. Let's go ahead and see who's going to skip to the end of this. DPD. Elias Pettersson. The rookie. So, fine. I'll put up here the rookie, Elias Pettersson. The defenseman, or as he's known in Vancouver circles, DPD. He has evolved so quickly into a very reliable defender for the Vancouver Canucks. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes, and he blends right in. One way that I grade defensemen is whether or not they need more seasoning. And when they come up and you go, well, that was a bad place to pass that puck, but they're young, so they'll learn. And with Pettersson, I really haven't had that feeling. So while there's 3 Petterssons on Vancouver, I do feel like Elias Pettersson is the most impressive of the 3 this year. And I don't say that as shade to the other 2. I'm saying that as praise to Elias Pettersson for stepping in as a defenseman and looking pretty good in the lineup for Vancouver. For LA, I'm going with Warren Foegele. Now, when I get to my favorite player on each team at the end of the year, Fogel's definitely going to be top 3 for the LA Kings. Hardworking forward. I have no idea why Edmonton let him go. I don't. I really don't understand. And if it's they needed more scoring and talent, he's a 20-goal scorer, and he's a good defensive. He does a little bit of everything out there. I think Fogel's been a fantastic pickup for the LA Kings, and pretty prominent scoring-wise on an LA team that at times has had trouble scoring goals. So, yeah, Fogel's been fun to watch. For Vancouver, or for Edmonton, a former Vancouver Canuck, Vasily Podkolzin. So I've talked about the thinness of their wingers in Edmonton. It does mean Podkolzin plays a more prominent role in Edmonton than I think he ever would have in Vancouver. He's hardworking. He does throw hits. And I think he's pretty responsible out there. I don't know that he's ever going to reach the 20-goal mark in a season. I don't know that he'll ever be a 50-plus point player. But the effort, the heart is there. The reality is that I think Podkolzin's become a very useful player in Edmonton, and I wish him the best. And it would be nice to see him get a big goal for Edmonton during the playoffs because he's worked hard. He's worked really hard this year. And he was working hard in Vancouver, too. They just didn't have room for him. So letting him go to Edmonton was, I think, the best thing for him, for the Canucks, for the Oilers. It just worked out for everybody. For Seattle, now I've talked about this player recently. I'll talk about him again here. Shane Wright. And when I talked about him previously, I talked about Wright and how well he's turned it around after a slow start at the NHL level. And with Seattle, there hasn't been a lot in terms of really good positive stories with their roster. So I just wanted to shine a spotlight on Shane Wright here and say, hey, this guy looks like he's going to be a very good scoring forward. Next season, he may reach that 65 point mark. He's got really good offensive instincts. Who knows? He may still end up being a point per game player at the NHL level. For San Jose, a veteran. I was like, I'm not picking one of the kids. I'll pick Toffoli. Toffoli goes to San Jose, does not leave at the deadline, and he's been a good goal scorer on a team that needs that. And I think his offensive instincts and his ability to go out there and play a really sound game, I think he's going to be able to show these young kids in San Jose what it takes to succeed at the NHL level. And so I'm glad Toffoli's still there, and I think he's had a really strong season on a San Jose team that has had troubles with scoring. For Calgary, I went with a goaltender for Calgary and not Wolf. A lot of discussion about Wolf and the whole idea of him winning the Calder, but Vladar, I think, deserves a lot of credit for the fact that he's had a really good year. I think that the 1-2 punch in net for Calgary's been sound. And so Vladar, who at one point in time, of course, was a part of the Boston organization, and I think Boston would love to still have Vladar. I think if you have Swayman and Vladar and not Korpisalo, I think that's a little bit better of a tandem. Not to throw any shade at Korpisalo, just I think Vladar has become a good backup slash 1B at the National Hockey League level, and I wanted to acknowledge that. On the Anaheim side of things, I have talked about this forward. I'm going to talk about him again, and that's Leo Carlsson. Leo Carlsson just keeps putting up points right now. Carlsson has been ridiculous and is starting to show why he was so valued at the draft and why Anaheim took him as highly as they did, which makes you wonder, so when Seneca makes his debut, what might we see there? Yeah, Anaheim's not done adding the young guys, and they've already got a pretty good young core there. So Anaheim and San Jose both building really well towards, I think, a pretty bright future. So that rounds out the Pacific Division. We now move into the Central Division, and with Nashville, let's talk a little bit about another young player, Svechkov. Svechkov, I think, has been one of the more consistent players in Nashville when he's been in the lineup. The offense is going to come for him. I think as soon as next year, we'll see more points and more goals from Svechkov than what we've seen this year. And good work ethic, really promising two-way game for him. I think while Nashville's had largely a disastrous season, I think Svechkov's been a pretty bright spot in what's otherwise been kind of a dark year. For Dallas, I'm going with. I'm going back on what I had written down. I'm gonna talk about Harley. Yeah, I'll talk about Thomas Harley. I don't know that I can praise Harley enough. Look, Heiskanen's been out for a while, and Dallas should be having trouble winning games without Heiskanen. Heiskanen's a fantastic defenseman. Harley has stepped into that void, and he's done quite well for the Dallas Stars. So I don't know that I can praise Harley too much. I don't think that I can. I am sure there will be those who say that I can, and I have. Dallas is a fun team. Harley will not be my favorite player when we get to the favorite player video, but I think Harley's had a really good year and deserves to be talked about here. For Chicago, I'm going to talk about Donato again. Yeah, Ryan Donato. I remember when he was a healthy scratch for the Boston Bruins, and then he kind of bounced around the league a little bit, and there was some debate about whether or not Donato was ever going to be a regular. He is the top scorer for the Chicago Blackhawks. He is ahead of Connor Bedard, and I know Connor Bedard's going through a bit of a sophomore slump, but to me it doesn't take away from what Donato's been able to do. And he looks like he's having fun out there. So as much as we, myself included, might have expected him to be moved at the deadline, maybe he said to the team, hey, keep me. I want to stay here. Because I don't know that Donato could score like this anywhere else. It is what I kind of refer to as the Brian Bradley rule. And for youngins, I'll explain this. Brian Bradley was I don't want to say middling, but he was like third line in Vancouver. Went to Tampa when they were an expansion team and was a point-per-game player and was a very good player. And yet the comment at the time was, if he'd stayed in Vancouver, that never would have happened, and Vancouver didn't regret losing Bradley. Donato, to me, feels like a similar situation. Would not have produced this way if he'd stayed in Boston or anywhere else that he was employed. It's been a perfect situation for him with the Chicago Blackhawks, so kudos to him for taking advantage of that. For Winnipeg, Kyle Connor's taken that next step this year. And Hellebuck is, of course, the story, and he's the MVP. But Connor's got a shot at ending up a 100-point player in the National Hockey League this year, and he's earned it. Very hard-working forward. I've talked about him before. There was a debate at one point where Ehlers was seen as better than Connor in the analytical community, and my eyeballs said no. And I'm not saying that as any kind of shade to Nick Ehlers, just I think Connor is a fantastic player. And I when I saw that, I thought, okay, so Connor's being underrated a bit. While not throwing any shade Ehlers' way, Ehlers is a fantastic forward who's a UFA this summer. So Winnipeg's going to want to hold on to him as well. St. Louis, with their run recently, I want to talk a little bit about Zach Bolduc. Bolduc's been fantastic for St. Louis during this 9-game winning streak, which is not on the line tonight, so me mentioning it means it's not a jinx. But Bolduc has been an excellent story for a St. Louis team where Holloway gets a lot of discussion. Thomas gets a lot as well. So does Kyrou, rightfully so, Buchnevich. But I'm going to throw a little bit of love Bolduc's way because he has been excellent for them over this 9-game winning streak. And it's really been all hands on deck for the St. Louis Blues. For Colorado, goaltender. I would imagine Mackenzie Blackwood was overjoyed when Colorado acquired him. Not any shade towards San Jose, but obviously as a goaltender, you're going to be behind a much better defense in Colorado than in San Jose. And then they signed him. They showed they wanted to keep him. So Blackwood right now should feel really, really good about himself, and rightfully so. He's an excellent goaltender in his own right. And he's had some ups and downs along the way. Now he looks like an established starter in Colorado. And this is why you don't necessarily just give up on a goaltender, and why goaltenders can be so remarkably hard to predict. Totally unpredictable. And so hopefully Blackwood can keep this going. But that's part of the unpredictable as well. For Utah, I think Sergachev has done well in his first year in Utah. There have been times where I felt like maybe they're overplaying him. Maybe they're putting him in situations where he's used to deferring to Hedman kind of thing. But he's done well as the guy. There have been times where there's been like turnover issues and things with Sergachev. But in general, his game's been really strong. I think this is just the start of us seeing what he can do. And so next year, you have to anticipate Utah's probably going to keep getting better. And Sergachev should be a key part of that. So you want to talk about a franchise where the future's pretty bright? I would say that's the case with Utah. And Sergachev's a driving force on that blue line. So he's shown that he can carry a blue line, which may very well have been a question, since even though he was the top point producer in Tampa on the blue line, we still knew that Hedman was the guy for obvious reasons. For Minnesota, so Minnesota's, it was kind of tough looking through all the stats and everything, and there's some guys having rough statistical years. So thinking outside the box a little bit, how good of a story has Marc-Andre Fleury been this year that he's still been able to play well enough as a backup for the Minnesota Wild, and it's just been great to watch him go through his farewell tour. The other night, Alex Ovechkin making his player, come on out here, shake his hand, come on, this guy's a legend, it's his last time we're going to see him, and it showed the respect that everybody around the NHL has for Marc-Andre Fleury. And this reminds me why people were kind of mad when Vegas traded him out to Chicago. While understanding what Vegas was doing there, it definitely was a case of the Vegas Golden Knights trading out a guy who is very much loved by the hockey community and by other players. And it's been a really, really good, consistently good story for Minnesota during a season that's been kind of bumpy, kind of up and down. So, yeah, Fleury's been a good story. Now we go east. And in the east, when we get to Florida, hope this name fits. It will. Samoskevich. As the season goes along, Mackie Samoskevich becomes more and more key to the attack in Florida. Similar to like Gonsalves in Tampa. Samoskevich, a lot of fun to watch. A lot of offensive talent. If you're in some kind of fantasy league where you have like players, you have a keeper league, and if nobody has Samoskevich, get him before next season. Because I think Samoskevich is going to have a big year next year in Florida. I could see him being in the 60-plus point range. Absolutely. He's got really, really strong instincts. He's a good offensive player. Florida's brought him along slowly, and it's worked out really well. Boston's tough because the season's mostly been suck. This season, as a Boston fan, has been just as difficult to watch as last season and the season before were fun. So finding a player for Boston that I could go, you know what, this is a good story, has been difficult. So I had to revert to Geeky. Now, why not Pasternak? Because Pasternak's my favorite player on Boston now. So he'll be in the favorite players video. Hopefully people just forget that between now and the favorite player video. But unless maybe I get hit in the head with a coconut, something like that, it'll be Pasternak then. So I want to talk about Morgan Geekie again. Morgan Geekie currently at, I believe, 27 goals. He has a shot at 30 goals on a team that can't score. So I hope they keep him long term. I hope that they do their best to make sure that he's got the right line mates going forward. Because Geeky, who if you've watched the channel long enough, back when Seattle took Geeky and the expansion draft, I felt like that was a great pick. That with a chance to play on a team that's going to need goals and talent and assists and all that, I felt like Geeky was a great pick. And then it never really worked out for him in Seattle. But it's worked out in Boston the way I thought it might in Seattle. Although the goals have been more than I would have even expected then. For Montreal, it kind of has to be one player, doesn't it? Lane Hutson. The storyline right now with Lane Hutson and the Calder Trophy, and it is highly likely he wins it. I think Wolf's kind of faded now, now that the Flames find themselves 7 points out of the playoffs. Unlikely to make it. Celebrini, his production's been a little bit slower, it feels, lately. Michkov's had a ridiculous run over the last about 20 games, and it feels like with the exit of John Tortorella that his offensive numbers are going to keep getting better. But it very likely could be Hudson's trophy at this point. There's still enough time left that maybe that narrative changes, but Hudson's doing things that just, he makes it look easy. I talked about it with DPD here in Vancouver. He just makes it look easy. Makes it look effortless. Like, yeah, it is no big deal. Why can't you guys all do what I'm doing? You see, look at that. I just went through a couple of guys, passed it over to Suzuki, and it's in the net. I don't understand why other guys can't do that. What's the problem? It's insane. Hudson is a supremely talented player, and if your belief is that he's just an offensively minded D-man, watch some Montreal games. He is good defensively as well. He's not going to make you forget Slavin as a defensive defenseman, but he's not a slouch in that region either. For Buffalo, not a lot of great stories with Buffalo, but I'm going to go back to McLeod. An acquisition from Edmonton that I think's worked out really, really well for the Buffalo Sabres and for McLeod, let's be honest. And it is interesting that I've got both Fogle for LA and McLeod for Buffalo. Maybe Edmonton made some mistakes in the offseason. So when I get into discussing teams that miss the playoffs, I then follow that up with teams that get eliminated from the playoffs. I may need to look at, if the Oilers end up out of the playoffs relatively early, I may need to look at the moves they made last summer, and that would include the McLeod trade. While Savoy may still turn out to be a good player at the NHL level, McLeod's a good player at the NHL level right now, and that is key. Ottawa. For Ottawa, going with Shane Pinto. Pinto has been exactly as the Ottawa Senators would have hoped. When he's in the lineup, he is productive. He is a good player. Ottawa has a really strong attack, and what's interesting with Ottawa is that they've kept a really good record, even though Brady Tkachuk's offense has evaporated. Like, Brady Tkachuk's offense has basically evaporated for the last, I think, 3 months. When I've been doing these videos and talking about players, and I look at stats, and I look at the stats from, say, January 1st, I am shocked at how little Tkachuk's been producing and how well Ottawa's been doing. And it's because of guys like Pinto, and because everybody buys into what Ottawa's doing right now. So even though, like, Giroux's numbers have dropped off too, as players when they get older, they do. But other guys jump in, a guy like Pinto too, and he provides them with depth down the middle, which you need if you're going to have success at the NHL level. For Detroit, so the things I was saying earlier about Samoskevich, and pick him up if you're in a keeper league, because he's going to be good. I would say the same of Marco Kasper with Detroit. The question of whether or not Steve Yzerman, is going to stick around as GM, I think he will. I don't think Detroit's gonna pitch him if they don't make the playoffs this year, which it doesn't look like they will. But a guy like Kasper, I think the sky's the limit with Kasper. He's a very good, hardworking forward. The offensive instincts have really started to show up. And this is why when everybody makes a big deal about Calder and, this guy's being overlooked, you got to see the big picture. Some guys just don't have fantastic rookie seasons. Some guys do, and they don't get as much attention because they don't get as many points. Kasper is going to be a very good forward, I think, in Detroit for a long time. For Tampa, we talk a lot about great two-way forwards. I don't think we talk enough about Anthony Cirelli in Tampa. Not only that, but Cirelli's an exciting two-way forward, too. Very defensively sound, but exciting and fun to watch. So I feel like Cirelli should be on the board when I'm talking about Tampa. There were a few different players I considered because Tampa's just really entertaining and they've got a lot of talent throughout their lineup. So good luck in the playoffs against Tampa, whoever draws them, which might end up being Toronto. For Toronto, good story lately has been Bobby McMahon. McMahon has really good offensive instincts, and I remember at the time that he came up, and there was some hype about him, and I thought, it's Toronto. So one thing with Toronto, when you're dealing with Canadian media reporting on the Maple Leafs, they will overhype players, and so I always kind of take it with a grain of salt when a player's debuting for the Leafs. I do that with Vancouver at times. I do that with other teams too, where there'll be a lot of hype, and I'm thinking, we'll see. But in McMahon's case, he's actually kind of exceeded any hype that he had when he first came up, and any idea of what he might be. And I think there's room for more growth with McMahon's offense in upcoming seasons, depending on how the playoffs go for Toronto, who stays, who goes, and what the roster looks like for next year. But McMahon's been really, honestly, a very solid forward, and so I felt like he should be on the board. All right, getting into the Metro now, and with the New York Rangers, player I have nothing but respect for, honestly, Vinny Trocheck. Trocheck, it's come over the years. So there was a point where I felt like he was overrated. That's gone. And now I would say Vinny Trocheck's kind of underrated a little bit. The Rangers are staying in the hunt for that playoff spot in part because of how well Trocheck plays at both ends of the ice. He's really an identity guy for them, and I think that he will be the next captain. We shall see how that goes, but I do feel like the Rangers are setting it up where this coming season, so once we get in, maybe in September they'll announce it, maybe they announce it early in the summer, I feel like Vinny Trocheck's the next captain with the New York Rangers. The Islanders do not have a lot of scoring forwards, so I will give props to Anders Lee. Last year, Anders Lee had no puck luck whatsoever, and in terms of expected goals, he was not getting the amount of goals that one would expect with the opportunities he had, meaning he was snake bit. He had high-quality opportunities. They were not going in the net. This year, they are. His shooting percentage is much higher this year, and Anders Lee has proven himself to be a pretty solid leader for the New York Islanders as well, and they're still in the hunt for a playoff spot too. Lee could be a dangerous guy come playoff time should they get there. For Pittsburgh, I didn't really have to think too much with Pittsburgh. Has to be Rickard Rakell. Raquel's been fantastic. I think Raquel's had the best season he's had in his career. A little quieter lately. I don't recall putting his name on the board as much over the last month. It's one of the things, too, with watching as much hockey as I do. It gets stuck in my mind of, I've been writing that guy's name on the board a lot lately, or I haven't. And with Raquel, it feels like I haven't been as much lately, but, I mean, Pittsburgh's kind of out of the chase at this point, so I'm not going to throw that at Raquel. And he's still over 30 goals this season, so he has been a really, really strong player for them in a season where other guys maybe haven't measured up. For Washington, there was only one name I could put. It has to be Protas. Tom Wilson is, I think, the premier power forward in the NHL. Protas is right there with him. Protas is a guy, too, that is built for the playoffs. And so Washington may at this point look like a team that could falter come playoff time because they haven't really been challenged as much, and they weren't expected to be this good, so there'll be some who believe there's kind of some fool's gold there in their performance. But Protas is fantastic, and I think they're going to be a very tough out because they have 4 good lines, 6 solid defensemen, 2 good goaltenders, and they just added Leonard to their lineup, so good luck. But Protas is really one of the guys who's driving what's going on with the Washington Capitals. For Columbus, I had a few different choices here. I'm going to go with Fantilli because watching a guy become a much better player and watching a player go from prospect and sometimes looks like a project and then just become a really good top 6 forward, that's been a fun journey with Fantilli. And it is one of the things that I really like about having this channel and this opportunity to talk to all you fine people on the internet every day about hockey is watching these guys come in, watching them develop. And the channel's been around long enough now where I've kind of watched entire careers at this point. So it's fun, and I look forward to watching, hopefully, the entire career of Adam Fantilli. I don't know how, he might be in the league another 20 years. So we'll see where things are 20 years from now, where I'm concerned. But yeah, Fantilli, fantastic. Philadelphia, I thought about putting Michkov on the board, but I have to. I have to put Konechny. I have to. It's required. He is consistently, no matter who's behind the bench, no matter whether they're playing well or they're not playing well, whether they're winning or they're losing, Konechny has been so ridiculously consistent as the most dangerous player they have. the best offensive forward they have and the driving force behind any offense created seems to go through Travis Konechny. And when we talk about MVPs and players that if without this guy, they'd be done, without Konechny, Philadelphia's offense at times this year just would be zero. So Konechny, and this is a team that has struggled with scoring goals, but Konechny has been really, really good throughout. The fact he's near a point per game is miraculous. And with new coaching next season and maybe a little more offense, Konechny could get into that 90 to 100 point range easily. Carolina, as we wind this down. You know what? We don't talk about Orlov, so I'm going to talk about Orlov because that defense in Carolina is always really good. We know that Gostisbehere's good. We know that Slavin's good. Orlov has been excellent on a team that lost Pesce. And I had some concern that, hey, Carolina losing Pesce, they could really miss him. No, Orlov's been good. And I'll throw an honorable mention, too, to Jalen Chatfield. Chatfield's become a very solid all-around performer on that blue line, even showing a little more offense than one might expect. But Orlov, good, solid, consistent performance from Orlov. And now Brent Burns comes to mind. Like that blue line has been a really good, strong point on a Carolina team that seems to make that a priority. So that rounds this out with New Jersey. And for the New Jersey Devils, I'm going the Hischier route. Nico Hischier is going to win a Selke Trophy, I think, at some point in his career. I don't know that it's going to be this year because I still think the two-headed monster of Kopitar and Barkov is there. And they're going to get votes because they're veterans that everybody knows how good they are. But Hischier has really come into his own, and the consistency is important too. That's really a big thing I've been trying to talk about in this video for almost every player on the board is that consistency, that development. In Fleury's case, the respect from his peers and just the great story it's been. But Nico Hischier, a leader on a New Jersey team that needs that leadership. And as he gets older, that should only get more and more prominent and become more and more important to the New Jersey Devils. So there you go, player from each team. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.